A genuine debate requires mutual respect, open minds, and a willingness to be swayed by reason. Walter Lippmann. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right, folks. Uh, Here we are. This is what I was promising the last couple days. I'm going to review this debate that Dave Smith and Josh Hammer had at TPUSA with Charlie Kirk moderating. Now, before I get into it, let's kind of settle some things. You might ask yourself, DL, why would you review a debate? You just need some content? Is that what's going on? Well, that always is the answer. Yes, I do need some content. However, I think there are some valuable lessons that we can learn from watching other people's debates and saying, okay, here's the good parts of it, here's the bad parts. I wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have said this, right? Stuff like that. So I think this is a value add. Before we get into that, people might ask, they say, okay, well, it's really popular now. What are your qualifications, right? What are your credentials? Who are you to review a debate? Are you some like master debater? No, no jokes there. That was not. There's no intended joke there. Um, and the truth is, no, I'm not. In fact, I've never had a debate at the level that Dave Smith or anybody else has, where you're in front of a huge audience and so on and so forth. I've had some smaller debates with people like maybe online or whatever, but nothing significant. So that might start. You might well, okay, if you've never even debated, then how do you judge it? Well, I was part of Toastmasters, and I talk about this all the time for quite a while, like about a couple of years, I think. It's a couple of years. that I went every single Tuesday morning. I went to our Toastmaster meeting. And the interesting thing about Toastmasters is that, a lot of people think, oh, you just go and you learn how to do public speaking. But there's more than that, actually. There are roles that you play when you go to a Toastmasters meeting. So you have somebody that's a speaker, you have somebody that's basically the MC, that's the Toastmaster. They're the person that's responsible for running the show and keeping it, going smooth and on time and whatnot. You have people that are, they sit back and they evaluate very specific elements of all the speakers. So you'll have somebody that's like a grammarian. That's in my opinion, that's the toughest role because when we speak very, we're very, we break a lot of grammar rules. And so it's very hard to identify where somebody has broken a rule when we're all guilty of it on a regular basis. So unless grammar is your thing, that tends to be the toughest one. But then you have timers, so each speech that somebody gives has a designated time. So you'll have somebody that manages the time and they'll like flash up little colors to let the person know where they are in their time frame, whatever their allotted time frame is. So you have all these different roles, but the most interesting one that I think doesn't get a lot of attention is the role of evaluator. And this is literally like your role, and you can do it in one of two ways. There are prepared speeches, and then there are the let's see, you can evaluate. Oh, okay, okay. I was getting a little bit lost in my thoughts there. So the evaluator generally only is for the prepared speeches. Okay. And so what happens is like I might come in and I'm working on my little, my path, and then I may have a designated speech that I'm supposed to prepare. And so then, it gives me, their booklet or whatever gives me the time frame. And so then I pass that information to the evaluator. And then their job is to sit there and listen and then just evaluate the speech, not the content, but the speech itself. And what's interesting about that particular role is when you first start doing it, it's really, really hard, especially when there's somebody who's much more skilled speaker than you. Cause then you're like, yeah, because the goal is to try to figure out like what could they have done better, what could they have done very well. And a lot of times you start off and you're like, well, everything was great. You didn't do anything. Like I don't know where you could improve. And that's just simply not the case. But eventually, as you go along, you start having an ear or maybe even an eye if you're talking about like, hey, I saw that your hands were in your pockets the whole time while you were talking, blah, blah, blah. Right. So you start learning to identify elements of a speech that could be improved. And it was funny because um initially when I got there, like everybody else, I would I would randomly get selected to evaluate a speaker, and it would be one of the better speakers of the club. And I would just, I would just be, and I was struggling because I'm like sitting there, like just waiting for just a mistake. You're like, okay, yeah, oh yeah, he said this thing wrong, and then you can get up there and be like, all right, well, yeah, so you used this idiom and it wasn't the right one, right? Like, it's very difficult. But then eventually, you know, it doesn't matter how skilled they are. You're like, you just know what to look for. And you can find even if they're small. And sometimes they're, because here's the thing. If somebody gets up to give a 5-minute speech in Toastmasters that's prepared and it's kind of like number one, the dynamic of where we are uh kind of sets the stage a little bit to be it sets a different stage than if it were somewhere else because we're literally all there to learn and to do better. Okay. But if they give a 5-minute speech, it's possible that they could give a really, really, really good one. And there's not a lot of room for improvement on that particular speech, right? It could be that the next speech that they give, they make some mistakes, but maybe that one was still pretty good. And everybody has a moment where like they did really, really well, and so in those moments, it becomes even more difficult, but there is still always something that could be improved. And so you learn to listen for their pace, how they communicate with the audience. Are they giving what is their hand gestures like? So are they speaking with their hands, which is not a bad thing, or the hands like way up in front of their face? or they got their hands in their pockets, or they up there with their arms crossed. There's all kind of things that you can look for. Were they swaying too much, or are they standing? Did they move too much, to one side of the stage, if you will? Hey, you were over here on the left side, and you kind of ignored the audience on the right. There's all these things that you eventually learn to pick up on. So my qualifications are that I literally studied with the intent of learning to evaluate other speakers, not so much to be critical, but so that when I'm a public speaker, I can either do the things that they were doing that went well, or not do the things that they weren't doing, or that not do the things that they did that weren't so well. Put it that way. So that kind of leads into the purpose then. My purpose in doing this is less about content, although I do kind of find it fun to occasionally just walk through a debate and say, all right, here are my thoughts. Here's where I think they, made a really good comment. Here's where I think they did, whatever. I find it enjoyable myself, but more importantly, so that you hopefully will grow as a speaker. And you don't have to be a public speaker, like somebody that stands up in front of an audience. But if you talk to friends about liberty, then you are a speaker, and you are trying to communicate an idea, and you hopefully want somebody to be convinced of your idea. So part of the purpose of me doing these is to improve yourself as a speaker, but then also improve you. And by you, I mean me as well. As an audience member, like, what should I look for when I'm listening to, two people debate? What kind? And then when you give feedback, if you learn to, and I hate to say it this way, but if you learn to be a better audience member, in other words, with higher, stricter expectations, not necessarily better in the sense that, like, you're a good going audience member, but like your expectations of what you are looking for are higher, then that will force speakers to rise to that challenge, right? So then we ultimately end up getting the best. We raise everything. We raise ourselves. We raise the quality of the speakers that we are listening to, so on and so forth. So that's why I wanted to do this, and that's why I think there's a value add. So I lo their debate was, on the topic of Israel, and whether, they covered a broad range of topics, like Israel's response to October 7th, Israel on the, uh, as a matter of foreign policy for the United States, APAC, so on and so forth. So they covered it basically was like, "Hey, let's talk about our differences with Israel." You had Josh, Hammer, who is more of your, typical conservative. I don't know who Josh Hammer is. I've seen the name floated around, so I can't really say that I'm terribly familiar with him. So this is like the totality of my knowledge of Josh comes from this video that I watched. Um, but he seemed to be more in line with your typical generic, perspective of Israel, which is, hey, they're an ally. We got to defend them. We got to assist them, in these different ways. And he had some differences in that, so he wasn't full on like give them all of our money and all this. And we'll get into that in a moment. Then you had Dave Smith, who is anti-war, and that's basically the foundation of his perspective. Is like, look, I'm anti-war. I would like to stop killing innocent women and children, and I believe in, I'm a libertarian, so I believe in the non-aggression principle. I apply it, in my daily life. I apply it on the national and the international stage as well. So that's who we've got now. I will say, even though I claim to be America's most objective libertarian, I have to be honest. I automatically go into this already on Dave's side, because I agree with Dave on the things that he says. Where Dave and I tend to disagree tends to be more in political strategy for the libertarians, and the Libertarian Party. That tends to be where we disagree the most. And then after that, when it comes to actual values that we have, our disagreements are far fewer. So I tried counting them, and then I just kind of got lost because I was trying to just grab clips. But the first thing that I noticed is that Josh interrupted a lot, a lot. Now, Dave interrupted a few times. He started out much better, and then toward the end, you could see where Dave was interrupting a little bit more, not nearly as much. I was trying to count them, but then I got lost in, because I was, trying to pick out clips and then identify what about that clip that I wanted to say, et cetera. So I kind of got lost in counting the interruptions, but Josh had many times more than Dave did. Probably like, 4 or 5 to 1, something like that. I mean, it was pretty rough. And so I will say that, when you're a speaker, like on a panel or in a debate, um, that's not good. And the more you do it, then, people start making assumptions about you. My assumption that I walked away with was that Dave's points were so strong, whether or not saying that Josh necessarily was like, oh man, he made a good point. I got to count. But I think Josh knew that Dave wasn't making a weak point and got irritated and tried to interrupt him. And I don't think that's I don't I think that's, good for Dave because it's like, hey, you had your opponent so worked up that he couldn't even wait his turn, right? And so that's a good thing on Dave, bad thing on Josh because it seems like, hey, you need to learn to control yourself here a little bit. It's a debate. You guys are sharing the stage. So I thought that was interesting. And then that kind of leads me to Charlie. I'm not the biggest fan of Charlie Kirk. He's a conservative, um, and he holds the conservative views, some of which I do. But I will say, man, he did a fabulous job moderating. He did not appear to favor Dave or Josh, in my opinion. He multiple times was working to repeat and clarify each person's position before he asked the other person. So if he was asking Dave a question that was based on something that Josh said, he would phrase his question and then look over at Josh and say, okay, is what I'm saying an accurate assessment, summary of what your point is? And then he would get Josh to agree, and then he would continue on with his question to Dave under that premise. And so I thought that was really good because when we've all seen the presidential debates, right? Where the moderators appear to, favor one person or the other. That's, we don't want that. And in this particular case, I think that Charlie Kirk would probably be more favorable to Josh Hammer. I think it seemed like they were friends. Again, I don't know Josh Hammer very well, and I don't really know the interactions that Charlie has necessarily with Josh or other people. So, and I don't follow him, so I can't really speak to his foreign policy views in full, but just my impression of everything says that he would have fell on the side of Josh more so than Dave. And in this particular case, I think it was good the way that he handled things. The other thing that he did was he was constantly like, "No, no, you got uninterrupted time. Stop. Let this person talk." And he did it for both of them because both of them interrupted. Obviously, did it a little bit more in favor of Dave because Josh interrupted. He just simply interrupted more. So I thought that was pretty good. So let's get into some of these clips. So let's start with, and I got quite a few. We'll try to get through all of them. If not, we'll do as many as we can. So let's start with their opening statements. I always think opening statements kind of set the stage for the rest. It sets the tone for you. And so I think your opening statement is very, very important when, whether you're giving, whether it's a speech or whether it's a debate, right? Your opening statement sets the foundation for not only the rest of your argument, but it also sets the tone between you and the audience. All right. And I want you to think about something. When you're debating, you kind of have two audiences. You have the audience that you're trying to convince, which is out, in the physical audience realm. Then you have the person that you're debating. And that person, you're not necessarily trying to convince them. You're just trying to have an exchange back and forth with them. Now, if you convince them along the way, that's great. But ultimately, who you're really trying to convince are the people watching it, right? Because the goal would be for me to watch and say, Dave made a really good point there. I never thought of that. Or, Josh made a really great point. I never thought about that. And then maybe I can walk away later and say, well, this person made more, they made far many more points of value than this other person. So perhaps, this person understands this, issue better and has, a better idea about this. And therefore, I should really consider what they had to say, right? Like that's ideally what you would get. So let's take a look at this first one. I believe this one is Dave's opening. So all of these clips are in order in which they happened. So I try to do it that way. That way you don't have some, unintentional wonkiness where, somebody says something, they're referencing something maybe they said before, and then it wouldn't make sense if they're out of order. So I just did it in order just to make it easy. So here we go.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and thank you guys for having me. Uh, as Charlie mentioned, I took a flight here, so I'm going on no sleep. So if Josh wins, it doesn't count.
Okay, so now Dave's a comedian. So I whenever you're giving a speech or you're introducing yourself or talking to the audience, it's never bad to put out a joke. And now it's probably going to be pretty easy for somebody who literally is a comedian for a living. So finding a joke isn't too difficult. Um, but I would also recommend practicing that joke on other people or practicing in the mirror, recording yourself, whatever. Dave doesn't really need to do that so much. But, if you're new to it, because telling a joke can go really good and it can go really bad because if you don't deliver well, but if it's just a simple joke, then it should be pretty easy, right? Like it's the joke that he just told there is not quite the level of joke that you're going to hear in a comedy set, because it's going to be part maybe of a broader context of a conversation and so on. So here he's just making a lighthearted comment like, yeah, if I lose, um, yeah, it's because I was lack of sleep. So I just want to point that out. I'm gonna try not to interrupt too much.
But I'm a stand-up comedian, and I'm also a libertarian. I'm really a follower of the greatest congressman who's ever lived, who is Dr. Ron Paul, who is turning 90 years old. Happy birthday to him. As far as look, I would say I think that American foreign policy for my entire life has been insane and like criminally insane. We've launched war after war. We've talked about peace through strength the whole time, but all we've gotten is permanent militarism and forever wars against countries that pose no threat to us. And a huge part of the reason why we've embarked on this is because the neoconservatives hijacked our foreign policy and they were in power after 9/11. And the neoconservatives, as everybody who's followed it knows, were joined at the hip with the Likud party. That's just a fact. They all admit it in their own words. And you can go back and you can read the Clean Break memo. You can read the companion piece, Coping with Crumbling States. This was written by David Wormser and Richard Pearl. And they laid out their plan. Now, their plan was that.
Okay, so I want to pause here. I think this is always good to reference other material as close to source as possible. So in this particular case, he's like, you can go read this, you can go read this, written by this guy and this guy. Right. So I think this is always good to kind of say, here are the sources for which I'm drawing my conclusion from or my information from, or both. Right. So this is always good. And it's tough. Now, in this particular case, it's probably a little easier for Dave because he talks about foreign policy so much and he's been in so many different debates that at this point, it should be basically like he could say it in his sleep. So if this is like your first debate on a particular topic, then it might take a little bit more work on your part to make sure. But and you don't have to have like one after another, after another, after another. Just maybe throw one in there. Just be like, hey, like so and so said in this book, right? And then you maybe you quote like a sentence from that person. That will go a long way because it shows that, hey, you have some sort of foundation from which you're drawing your perspective from. And so it kind of gives other people like, okay, how are they coming to this conclusion? So let's continue.
To help Israel, the clean break is a break from the peace process, a break from Oslo, which was designed to give the Palestinians their own state. And these neoconservative geniuses decided that instead of the Israelis making peace with the Palestinians, they could just have the US overthrow all of the surrounding governments that were giving Israel a hard time. And this is where four-star general Wesley Clark says that he saw the plans right after 9/11 to overthrow 7 countries in the next 5 years. And what was the last country on that list? It was Iran. Okay? This is a big part of what the whole conflict is about. Now, the neoconservative has kind of become like a pejorative for war hawks these days. And don't get me wrong, I support that. Keep calling them neocons. But the actual neoconservatives, the self-identified neoconservatives, aren't really in power anymore. But Benjamin Netanyahu is still in power in Israel. And the Likud party is still pushing for this. Now, I want very quickly, I'll try to not go too long here. Okay. They actually did focus group testing back in the 90s before the first Gulf War in Iraq. And, you know, Americans weren't really moved by, we have to reinstall the king of Kuwait, but they were moved by the nuclear threat. Now, if you go read Coping with Crumbling States or the Clean Break memo, in the 90s, when the neocons admitted they wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein, they never said it was because he had nuclear weapons. They said he was a problem for Israel in the region. They only made up that lie after 9/11 because they knew that's what would sell you, or maybe not you, you're too young, but sell your moms and dads on going and fighting this war. And by the way, when they talked about wanting to overthrow Iran, it was the same thing. Never had nothing to do with a nuclear threat. That's just the thing they use now as the excuse. So yes, there is tremendous influence by Israel in our government. That doesn't mean I'm subscribing to some crazy conspiracy or telling you to hate Jewish people. I'm Jewish. I'm just saying they have influence. They've used it in a very negative way, and we should reject this insane foreign policy and embrace the foreign policy that Dr. Ron Paul advocated, which is the foreign policy of the founding fathers. Stay out of entangling alliances, stay out of unnecessary wars, be friends with the world, and trade with the world. That's the key to prosperity.
Okay. So I think he did a phenomenal job there, laying out kind of like, here's the foundation from which I'm going to sprout all of the rest of my answers. We should be able to look back and say, do his answers match, or do they come out of, I guess is a better way to say it. Do they come out of that opening statement? Because if your opening statement says one thing and then all of your other answers say something else, well, then it's a mismatch and you won't make sense, right? Because ultimately, think of this, even though it's a debate and even though the questions may come out of nowhere, right? Like you don't really know what questions are necessarily going to be asked. What you want is the totality of what you say to all make sense together. So a debate will be very similar to a speech. If I give you a speech and I say, all right, today, what I want to talk about is this, and I want to, and this is going to be the driving force for the conversation, these books that I've read or this history or, whatever the case is. But then later, all the points I make kind of have nothing to do with it. Then you're going to walk away as the audience member, a bit confused. Like, what was his point? So all of your points should be able to you should be able to take your points and bring them right back to your opening statement. So I think he did a really good job there. And then he kept his time because it was only like 3 minutes or something like that. So that's pretty good. And you'll have to practice giving speeches in a short amount of time because, and that's the interesting part of Toastmasters is that they have something called what's it called? I was drawing a blank on it. They have the prepared speeches and then they have the let me look here. Oh yeah, the table topics. I have my notes up over here. So they have something called table topics where like maybe I'll get up and I'll say the topic is healthy eating, right? And then nobody knows, everybody's now their first hearing that's the topic. And so then I bring you up and so Fred comes up and I go and he doesn't know what question I'm going to ask, but he does know what the topic is. What's the theme for the day. And so the theme will be, okay, healthy eating. So then I might say, all right, when you go to, how do you balance eating healthy when you go to a fast food restaurant? Right. And I might just ask that question. And so now he's got about 10 seconds to come up with a response. In a debate, that kind of happens as well, right? You have this theme, but you don't know what the question that somebody's going to ask you. And then you have about 10 seconds to figure it out. And so, again, if you can lay a good foundation, then all of your answers can draw from that. So, and then, just wanted to point out that, the elements of Toastmasters kind of allow you not to just learn about public speaking, but also, you can incorporate the lessons that you've learned into debate. So let's get on to Josh's introduction or opening statement. And let's see, where are we? There we go. And then we'll hear how he opened for himself. Here we go.
All right, so it's really great to be here. Thank you, Charlie, for having me. Thank you, Turning Point, for having me back. It's really wonderful to be at this amazing conference. Dave joked that he didn't get any sleep last night. Today's actually also a fast day on the Jewish calendar. I'm not eating or even drinking water, so we're all on the same page here. We're all just totally screwed. So you can kind of get off the same starting place there.
Look. Okay, so that was kind of cool. Like, he bounces off of Dave's joke. He doesn't really land a joke per se, and I don't know that he was intending it to be a joke, but that's not that I think that's a good thing. It's a nice way to kind of establish a rapport. Like, hey, you're tired. Well, guess what? I'm fasting right now. So, we're all in this boat together.
Look, there's a lot of substance to respond to. I'll just really briefly do that, and then we'll talk about what I actually want to talk about in my opening remarks. Dave mentioned this alleged coordination between the neoconservatives, which I presume he means Bush-era foreign policy, and the Likud party. I presume half of you probably don't even know what the Likud party is. It's referring to the Israeli right. It's very instructive, and Dave always conveniently neglects to inform the audience of this, that the actual leader of the Israeli right back in 2002, a man by the name of Ariel Sharon, vehemently opposed the Bush administration going into Iraq. So this whole notion that Israel is talking America into foreign wars is total nonsense. Actually, in 2011, when the Obama administration toppled Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, it's actually well known that Libya actually sent secret diplomatic envoys to Israel, trying to tell them to then talk to the United States and France to talk NATO off of that attack there. So this whole narrative is totally backwards there. But I want to kind of dumb things down a little bit here. I see a lot of people wearing 47 hats. I voted for President Trump multiple times. I love our president. You guys love our president, right? You love President Trump? Okay. This is Turning Point freaking USA. Charlie, God bless you. You have built the largest MAGA grassroots army in the country. Seriously, my friend, you deserve this. You all are card-carrying members of it. We here are part of that. The good news is that while no one should be afraid of debate, and this debate is a nice thing here, the MAGA movement is actually quite unified. Believe it or not, all the talk to the contrary when it comes to these issues. An overwhelming majority of self-identified MAGA Republicans support close U.S.-Israel relations. According to a CBS News poll, moreover, after the recent Operation Midnight Hammer B-2 bombers in Iran, 94% of self-identified MAGA Republicans supported President Trump's dropping those B-2 bombs on Fordo, Natanz, and the other Iranian facilities there. This is a wildly popular policy there. What did Dave Smith say about this? He re-upped his now years-long crusade to call for Donald Trump's impeachment. Y'all probably don't know that about Dave Smith, do you? He's now called for Donald Trump to be impeached multiple times. But Dave, look, I mean, I don't like when people misquote me either. You probably don't like when people misquote you. So I actually have a little bit of a highlight reel here of Dave Smith's tweets over the years.
So I just want to pause here. We are now 2 minutes and 36 seconds in to his opening statement, and he hasn't really discussed like his foreign policy views, where where does he stand on Israel? He's not laying out the foundation of anything else that he's going to point back to, at least as it relates explicitly to Israel. He started out, kind of connecting with Dave, like, oh, yeah, I've been fasting. But then he quickly goes into, hey, you guys are wearing 47 hats. Do you like Donald Trump? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, but we're here to debate about Israel. And I think this is important here in just a moment. So just pointing out that, Dave laid out and he's like, look, you got this party, you got these people. This is what they've done. This is where I disagree with them, et cetera, et cetera. And then, which matches the topic. And then Josh over here seems to be talking about Trump and Dave. So let's continue listening.
Dave Smith, March 19th, 2024. Donald Trump is responsible for around 500,000 deaths in Yemen, and between the weapons to Ukraine and the Abraham Accords Jerusalem embassy, he is at least partially responsible for the two worst humanitarian crises in the world. He's a war criminal who should spend his life in prison. He is calling Donald Trump a war criminal who should spend his life in prison. You should be livid at that. I am livid at that as a Trump supporter. Donald Trump, Dave Smith, June 16, 2025. Trump allegedly had full prior knowledge of Israel's attacks and gave it his blessing while pretending to be negotiating with the Iranians as a cover. If this is true, Trump is the most impotent bitch of a leader imaginable. He's calling our president, the greatest president in my lifetime, an impotent bitch. Are you kidding me?
So I think this is interesting because we're now 3 minutes and 24 seconds in, and we still have not heard like the foundation of his argument for Israel and how America should engage in interactions with them and our foreign policy and how it overlaps or works with their foreign policy. Right now, he's just literally talking about Trump and then, trying to make Dave look bad for having past criticisms of Trump. But they're not here to debate what Dave has said on social media. And they're not here to debate Dave's opinion of Trump. When they're not here to debate whether or not Trump is the best president of somebody's lifetime or not. That's not what they're here to debate. But that's what he's talking about.
June 21st, 2025, Donald Trump has now launched an illegal war of aggression against Iran. The risk of an absolute catastrophe is very high and the benefits are non-existent. Dave Smith, June 21st. Dead wrong. This notion that World War III would start, not a single American casualty. We should be celebrating that. Donald Trump fulfilled multiple campaign promises. The escalator speech in 2015 at Trump Tower, he literally said, I'm not going to let Iran get a nuclear weapon. And guess what? He said, I oppose a neoconservative foreign policy. He did both of those things with Iran. He deprived the Iranian regime of nuclear weapon while not losing a single American sailor, soldier, or Marine while depriving them of nuclear weapons. And finally, Charlie, I'll end on this. Dave Smith, July 8th, 2025. In the last month, Donald Trump has launched a war of aggression on behalf of a foreign government, exploded the debt, announced that he's continuing the Biden policy of arming Ukraine, and covered up a giant child rape operation. So according to...
Okay, so he's now basically just showing where Dave has criticized Trump as if that criticism is automatically assumed or should be assumed to be incorrect. Like, hey, best president of my lifetime, how dare you? Right? It's very Greta Thunberg, like, how dare you? You criticize the president. Like, it's kind of like that old Southern, like, well, I never, right? And so, but here's where I think this last comment here is where he kind of really sets the stage for the rest of the debate. And I want you to listen.
My interlocutor, Donald Trump is not just engaging in wars on behalf of foreign government. He is also covering up the world's giant pedophilic child sex trafficking ring, allegedly, I presume, on behalf of a foreign government as well. So I'm disgusted, frankly, that this man is on stage, but I'll end it at that.
Okay. Okay. So did you hear that? He's like, I'm disgusted, frankly, that this man is on stage, and I'll end it at that. So here's my problem. You were invited to come and debate somebody. You had an option. You could say yes, or you could say no, right? If you didn't feel that they were worth your time, the answer should have been no. I am not going to debate that person, right? And you should just decline. And you don't even have to say why, or you can. You could say, hey, you know what? I don't think this person's at my level. And, it's just, I'm you however you want to say it, right? You could say it more humbly, you could be more arrogant about it. You could just be like, look, I don't think this person's ready for me. And so no, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste the audience time. I'm not going to waste their time. And you can just simply decline. But the moment you have agreed, I think it's a matter of respect for the host. So in this case, Charlie Kirk, the other opponent, but more importantly, the audience. To tell the audience, like, hey, I agreed to this. Therefore, I'm going to do my best to convince you that this person is incorrect and that I am correct. That should be your goal. So if you're ever getting on a stage, I would advise you to always avoid any kind of like, I'm too good for this person, because it just comes across as arrogant, right? And now, like, this is only a few minutes in to the whole debate. So now I've got to watch the rest of the debate with the underlying idea in mind that Josh doesn't sound like he even wants to be there. And he definitely is explicitly said he doesn't think Dave should be there. So I don't think of him now as, hey, he's giving his best. These are his best arguments. However, guess what? If they're not his best arguments, I'm not going to cut him slack. I'm not going to later go, yeah, he was debating Dave Smith. So, that's why he kind of, took it easy and didn't give it his best. And they were weak arguments. And that's okay because it was Dave Smith. No, it was a huge audience. Many people have watched that debate now. And so that's the art, he is now giving me the arguments that he wants me to hear, right? Whether that, like, think of it this way. If I'm on the fence and I get the sense that this guy doesn't even respect Dave, and so therefore isn't really giving his best, then if I'm not convinced of Josh's position, whose fault is that? It's not Dave's fault so much as it is Josh's fault, right? And the same would go in the other direction. If that, like, I can't, like, if you come to a stage and you're not appearing to give your best, when people walk away and don't adopt your ideas, that's your fault. 100%. Period. Right? You can't even say, well, I was having a bad day. You chose to have a bad day. Now, the question is, okay, how should Dave respond? Well, he gave an interesting response because, and I'm going to play his response because, number one, Josh spent half his time talking about Dave, even though this was your opening to a debate on Israel. Okay. And then he spent, another quarter of the time roughly on Trump and how great he was. And he didn't really spend much time on, okay, here's the foreign policy ideas that I think we should adopt and why I think we should adopt them in a 2-minute elevator pitch. He didn't give that. So, but he did talk about Dave a lot. So what is Dave? How should you respond when somebody brings up because that could happen, right? Like, you could be in a debate and somebody could be like, oh, well, Fred over here said this and this and this and this and this, right? So how do you respond? I think Dave actually did a pretty good job of responding. Let's watch that clip.
Got it. So you can see peace is hard. I'm trying to keep the peace. Now, Dave, I want to give you an opportunity, about 4 minutes to respond to that. But also, I do want to, now that we had the opening salvos and the Tomahawk missiles launched, let's respond as you see fit. No, and then bring us to the 12-day war, because let's stay focused on that.
Yeah,
we can.
Well, the thing, Charlie,
but defend yourself.
Sure.
Obviously.
Well, the thing is, Charlie, as you may have noticed, and some of you may have seen some of my other debates. Every single time I come up here to debate issues, and they come up here to debate me and my character. It's all they have every single time, because they can't actually take on any of the arguments. And so the most pathetic low-hanging fruit of, you guys like Trump, this guy said bad things about Trump. Listen, guys, I'm a free American. I supported Donald Trump in this last election. Yes, he did just actively cover up a giant child rapist ring, and I'm going to criticize him for that, okay? And I'm sorry, after all these years of us right-wingers saying, protect the children, come on, that's bad for your soul if you don't. You speak up about that. It's horrible what he's doing.
Okay, so that wasn't, that was the essence of his response back to Josh. I like that response because he embraced everything he said. He didn't try to weasel out of it, right? Like, he didn't say, okay, well, you're missing the context. The reason that because the moment you try to defend yourself as if they're putting something out of context, and maybe they are, right? I think it starts to look bad for you from an audience because it feels like you're telling a lie, like you're trying to, oh yeah, but this, right? And so it's like you don't want people to know about it, so you try to say, well, there's context, and sometimes there is. Sometimes there is context and that person is missing it. And in that particular case, again, you still own it. Yes, I said that. And it's a shame that you missed the context and you're trying to make it look worse than it really is. Here's the context, right? And that would be a good way to to segue into talking about the context that's missing without looking like you're trying to evade it, right? And this is, you can do this in many situations, because a lot of people will, it's very common for people to try to make you look bad, whether it's an interview, a debate, or whatever, or maybe it's just maybe you gave a speech and somebody's asking a question at the end, right? And a lot of it's the gotcha, right? Somebody's trying to get a gotcha in there. The best way to get around or to defeat, if you will, a gotcha is to start by saying yes, right? Or affirm whatever it is that they're saying, right? Yeah, and you can say like, "Oh, yes, I did say that, and here's why." Right? Start with yes or whatever's appropriate in that particular situation. I've noticed this in questions where, like, you watch Congress or you watch maybe an interviewer and they'll say, okay, but didn't you one time say this? And a lot of people go, well, yeah, but okay, that sounds like you're about to lie to me. So the best thing is to say, I did. Yes, absolutely. Embrace it. However that comes out, however you articulate it, embrace it. So Dave made all these tweets and they were seemingly tough tweets to deal with, right? Like, he's been criticized, or he's criticized Donald Trump very, very harshly. He's literally sitting in front of a group of people that are Trump supporters. And what did he do? He's like, yeah, I said that. And then he kind of reinforced it by saying, hey, remember all the times that we said, protect the children? Now's that time. Now's the time to act on it. So I think that was a very good response. Never try to evade, or never make it look like you're trying to evade. And sometimes people will take you out of context. He didn't. He literally read the whole tweets. So he didn't take Dave out of context. But sometimes people will. You know, they won't necessarily pull out a piece of paper where they have exactly what you said written. So maybe they take you out of context because they've poorly remembered what you said, or they're doing it on purpose. They're like, oh, well, you said this one thing, and they conveniently leave out something that you started with or something that you ended with that would have made the context of, your comment make more sense. So sometimes people do it on purpose. And again, the way to get out of that is just simply to embrace it. Yep, I said that. And if you no longer believe that, yep, I said that and I was foolish and here's why, or whatever, right? But again, lead with a yes, an affirmation, right? Don't, and no but, no well, any of that kind of stuff, and you're going to immediately, the audience is going to immediately be like, he's got something to hide, right? That's how it looks. All right, so let's take a look at this next clip here. And what I'm trying to not do is what I'm trying to not do is pick apart the arguments whether I think they were right or wrong, right? Like, I'm not trying to have my own debate on Israel. One, I generally am going to agree with Dave anyway, so it would just be me reinforcing what Dave said and disagreeing with Josh, and I don't think that's very productive. Instead, what I want to do is try to kind of say, like, look, watch these guys, see what they did. This was good. This was bad, so on and so forth. So let's play this next one here.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd be curious if Dave Smith also believes in the tooth fairy and pink unicorns. I mean, what lie does Dave Smith not believe, frankly?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be curious if Dave Smith also believes.
Pause that. So again, debates can be very rough. And I think the big problem here is that Josh has already set himself up to be, just like what Dave said, I'm arguing against Dave, right? As a debater, like, he doesn't belong here. He's got a terrible opinion, whatever. Rather than, let me take on the substance of what you say. Now, maybe Josh can, I don't know, right? Maybe he just chose, maybe he was being lazy. I don't really know. Maybe he can't. And when I say can, I just mean like maybe he has enough information that he could say, okay, I hear what you're saying here, but have you thought about this, Dave? What about this? Doesn't this, comment over here, or doesn't this action over here, kind of prove otherwise to what you're saying? Or doesn't it show that there's more nuance even than what you're saying? Right. Like, presumably, Josh is knowledgeable enough to have that kind of a conversation, and then kind of they can both work out what makes sense. But instead, he seems to be taking shots at Dave. Look what Dave said. Oh, does he believe in the tooth fairy? That's just poor form. And you can, if you watch the whole debate, you'll see that Charlie is really opposed to this, which I thought was good. And he was working really, really hard to say, no, no, no. Let's find where we agree. Let's find where we disagree. And where we disagree, let's see if we can't tease that out and figure out where the disagreement is, and if in that disagreement we can find even some agreement. So I think Charlie did a very good job in that sense. But I would advise against taking a shot at your opponent, right? Because again, I think it's poor form, and I think what you want to do is you want to demonstrate that, number one, you understand the topic well enough to speak with them. You already get that assumption by virtue of being on the stage. When I was much younger and I was working, well, not much younger, maybe like 5 or 7 years ago, I was part of a local Ruby programming group, meetup group, and I was just a member. And then they would have, meetups, and they would have speakers. And somebody invited me to speak, and I was kind of nervous because I was like, well, I'd like to speak. I like public speaking, but I'm very, I'm still novice when it comes to development. And what can I say that, is going to be interesting to these guys who seem to know much more than me? And the guy that was the meetup organizer, he said something to me that was very profound. He said, look, if somebody invites you to speak, he goes, at their event that they're hosting, he goes, you only have to worry about them. They have deemed that you are knowledgeable enough to be a speaker. So go with that confidence, right? And that's not something that Dave or Josh have a problem with, but I'm just kind of reinforcing what I've said. By virtue of you being on the stage, someone has deemed you worthy of, you're knowledgeable enough, you have sufficient insight, whatever. They have deemed you valuable enough to speak to this audience. So number one, act like it. But then number two, if you insult the other guy, not just insulting them, you're insulting the host and the audience. So I would avoid, you know, doing what Josh did, which is to kind of keep insulting Dave, because he's basically saying, like, you don't deserve to be up here. Well, the host thought otherwise. The audience thought otherwise. Because if the audience didn't think otherwise, they wouldn't be there. Right. So, so clearly they thought he was worth being up there. So therefore you should operate under that, and then just refrain from all those, insults. Now, you could say, if in the middle of the debate it gets a little heated, you could say, "Oh, I bet you probably believe this." Not the best, but it's not the worst either. But that's far different than kind of leading and kind of continuing on this path of, you don't really belong here. You're not worthy. Okay, well, you're not just insulting that person. You're insulting the host and the audience. So don't do that. All right, this next, I think the next couple videos are going to be necessary to watch. And so let's check out these videos here, and then let me see here. I think it's going to be 3, or is it? No, maybe not yet. Hold on. Oh, maybe not yet. Okay, so we'll get to that. So let's just play this next video, and then we'll discuss it. So, oops, clicked on the wrong thing. Okay, there we are.
Do you think it would be bad if Iran got a nuclear bomb?
Okay, very direct question. I like it.
Yes, I think
Okay,
it's
good.
bad. I think it's bad.
And I think we can all agree on that. That is a moral
I don't
agreement.
think anybody should be allowed to have nuclear weapons secretly.
Right. And so
How about that?
I will ask Josh about that, because that's a not so subtle dig at Israel. Do you
Okay,
think it would be bad
I
if
think.
Iran got a nuclear?
Okay, so I thought that was great. That was a great land on Dave's part. Okay. Because he's asked a question. Number one, he starts what you hear what he said? Yes. He starts with a yes, unambiguous. When you start with a yes, it really gives the audience confidence in your answer. That doesn't mean they agree, but they just know, like, hey, this person is answering honestly, right? When you say yes, or if you say no, right? If you say no, right? It's a very clear, unambiguous. Then after that, you can follow up with, whatever additional context that you think is necessary. What I thought was interesting is when you want to kind of help direct a conversation or when you want to get a swipe in, Dave probably did that off the cuff. And that was I thought that was a pretty good um, drop in there, I guess. There's probably a better term for that, where he basically says, yes. And then goes on and says, I don't think anybody should have one, secretly. And it's clear to anybody that knows about this topic what he's talking about. And so I think this, if you're going to make a subtle dig, number one, don't make it at anybody on the stage, right? Make it about the topic that you're talking about. And this fits with Dave's overall perspective, right? So he starts off, if you go back to his opening statement, he's like, look, anti-war, these parties, they have been, doing this thing. I oppose this. And so he's kind of laid this foundation of what his position, you know, what his position rests on. And so then the dig, it follows that foundation, right? So everything gets tied back. And this is why I think it's really good for everybody who wants to do any kind of public speaking. Basically, work out your elevator pitch or work out your 2-minute pitch or whatever, however you want to phrase it. But your short version of your position, and then everything ties back to that. And that's how your debates should go. That's how your speeches should go. Just a regular conversation with your mom and your dad, whatever, right? All right, so now we're going to get into this. Is what's coming up next is very interesting because I see this happen all the time. Um, and I should have gotten a second video. Let's see. I think, yeah. So I think this next one is 2 parts. So watch this first video, and then we'll watch the second one. Then I'll explain what I'm talking about. But we're going to talk about a concept known as resulting.
I'll give Donald Trump credit that, okay, it didn't turn into a catastrophe. He took the off ramp when he had the chance. But look, a lot.
Okay. I do want to pause here for just a second and point out it's not a problem to acknowledge that a person that you oppose did a good thing. Like, that's okay. Nobody is always bad, right? Like, everybody has done something that you can appreciate. So nobody, like, I mean, maybe if we're talking about like a 5-minute scenario, then maybe that person didn't do anything good. But I mean, in a broader context of something like war, being a president, something that has, that's ongoing for months and weeks and whatever over a certain amount of time, they're never going to be always bad. So it's okay to acknowledge, we go, okay, yeah, look, they did this thing. It was good. And that's okay. Even if it goes toward your position, it's still okay. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to argue a broad idea. So in this case, Dave is trying to argue like, hey, we don't need to be involved. And he can argue we don't need to be involved while saying, yep, this was a good thing. Even if that was a good thing in favor of his view, he can say, look, it's a good thing. Yes, I appreciate that. It doesn't change the many other things that I think are bad things. Right. And that's what you need to keep in mind. So I just wanted to kind of point that out.
A lot of that was out of Donald Trump's control. The risk of this war, like a lot of people love to, like Josh likes to read my tweets when I was saying this could turn into a catastrophe.
Because you were dead wrong. You look stupid.
Oh. Okay. So I think that was the first time that he interrupted. And like you can see, there's a lot of contempt that Josh has for Dave. And for me, even though I'm more partial to Dave, I kind of look at it and I bristle and I'm like, ugh, dude, really? That's cringy. Stop. Like nobody wants to watch that. And Charlie, at some point, he says, like, look, people didn't come here to just watch you two yell at each other. Like, they weren't yelling at each other, but he was just making a point. He's like, look, that's not what people are here for. They want to hear reasoned, rational debate. They want Dave to come out with all of his information in the context that he puts on it. And then they want Josh to do the same thing. And then they want both of them to dispute what the other said. And then why? Why is that idea wrong? Right? Not just that's stupid. Like that, okay. Like, again, we go back to the audience is there to watch Dave, and even people that might oppose Dave might want to hear what he had to say, but they also might, more importantly, want to hear how will Josh rebut that, so that later they can rebut that argument at the dinner table with their family, right? Like, that's kind of the reason people are watching these kind of debates, so that we can learn the stronger and weaker points in an argument. Also, we probably just want to see it. And unless you're really looking for just two people to yell at each other, which you can watch old versions of Jerry Springer, but if that's what you want. But this is a debate where presumably two people are knowledgeable enough to duke it out. And that's what we want to see. We want to see that information being duked out.
Josh. Guys, don't say.
Hold on. No.
Let's de-escalate the stupid stuff.
Actually, what Josh is saying is the lowest IQ argument that anyone can make. I was warning that there's a risk of a catastrophe, and he's saying you're stupid because there wasn't a catastrophe. This is on the level of playing Russian roulette, and if the bullet doesn't go off, you go, see, dummy, you were warning that could go bad.
Okay, so I think Dave's response is fair. Like, he just got called stupid, and so now he's like, all right, let's talk about that. And he did something very interesting. He said, if you heard it, you notice that he didn't say, let's just play it back. Let me just play it back here real quick. Let's see here. Is it this one? Yeah, this one. Go back.
I'll give Donald Trump.
He looks stupid.
Oh.
Josh.
All right.
Guys, don't say.
No.
Let's de-escalate the stupid stuff.
Actually, what Josh is saying is the lowest IQ argument that anyone can make.
Okay. The lowest IQ argument that anyone can make. So now he's not addressing Josh particularly, not at this moment. And I think this is good. This is a nice way to disarm somebody, because here's the thing. If somebody insults you, it's easy to say, yeah, you're an idiot too. And then what are they going to do? They're going to respond, and it's just going to devolve. So if you want to maintain control of the situation, control of the conversation, the best thing that you can do is not take that kind of bait. And I don't know that it was necessarily bait intentionally from Josh's. He probably just was having an outburst because he was angry that he had to be there, even though he chose to be there with Dave Smith, who he apparently does not have any respect for. Right. And so I'm just going to assume it was an outburst, but nonetheless, Dave handled it well, and he's maintaining control of this, and he's not being dragged down into screaming and yelling and, all that good stuff, which he could be. And I think later they do kind of have a little bit of a back and forth. It seems like maybe Dave finally gets tired of it. And he's like, all right, fine. Right. And we'll see that in a moment. But I think that's a very good way to handle somebody that insults you in a debate. Say, look, that's a low IQ argument, and you can insult the argument, because you're not saying, hey, you're low IQ. We're just saying you're engaging in this low IQ argument. Is that really how you want us to perceive you? Do you really want us to think that your best argument is a low IQ argument? Right. And so you can insult arguments all day long, and that's fine. So I think it's good that he avoided insulting back. All right. So now let's watch this next clip. So this is following up. We're still going to talk about resulting here, and Dave kind of touches upon it. So let's listen.
Josh, I want you to respond to that. But to Dave's point, do you think Israel has a secret nuclear program, and is that a problem?
Yeah, I think it's not particularly disputed that Israel has a nuclear program. We know exactly where it is based. This is not a particularly hidden thing there. I mean, it's so well known, in fact, Charlie, that I don't know exactly why it's officially a secret. Unofficially, it's not much of a secret. I'm non-Israeli. I have no idea why the exact policy is the way it is. I don't particularly have a program with it. As I said, it's one of the world's worst kept secrets. It kind of just is what it is. But more generally speaking, I don't understand why we're going so far down this rabbit hole of would've, could've, should've. The people, look, let's say something very simple here. The people who said that Donald Trump's involvement in the 37-hour operation of the B-2 bombers flying from Missouri to Iran and back with not a single shot fired at our boys. By the way, as I said, that was partially due to the fact that the IDF had so neutralized the Iranian Air Force and their defenses there. So the fact that he was able to accomplish that so amazingly there, we should have seen that coming, because it was actually pretty easily foreseeable. And the people who did not see that coming are the people who have lost credibility to comment, frankly, on these affairs. People who warned about thousands and thousands and thousands of dead American lives, who said that China and Russia would swoop in and that this would be World War III. Well, you know what? God bless you all, because you apparently survived World War III.
Okay. So there was a podcast a long time ago with Annie Duke. She's a poker player, and she also engages she studies and talks a lot about decision-making processes. Like, how do people make decisions? How do they, and she's got a book called Thinking in Bets, Making Decisions When You Don't Have All the Answers. And so one of the things that she points out is there's this concept of resulting. And Josh kind of does it, but he kind of, he does it in the first clip. In the second clip, not nearly as much. But basically what resulting is saying, the result of this action was positive, so therefore the action itself was good. And in the particular case of, okay, should we have bombed Iran? And a lot of people were like, hey, if we bomb Iran, we could be, in a World War III and this could happen, blah, blah. So there's a couple things here. Number one, whenever you're speculating about the worst, you will probably always be wrong. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't understand how things are working or how they might have worked positively. You just believe that, hey, the risk of things going negatively is so high, perhaps we don't want to do this. Okay. And I don't think anybody was saying, if you do this, this will absolutely happen. No doubt about it, 100%, although they probably sounded quite like it. I think the way that they were really presenting it, and I could be wrong on this one, but I think the way that most people were really presenting it was simply raising the alarm and saying, this is not a good idea. And the intent of their words was to say, the probability is so high, it is a very bad idea. Or maybe the argument was more instead, maybe the probability isn't so high, but the risk of what could possibly happen is so bad, is so high that the it's so negative, it is so bad that even if the risk is low, we don't want to do this, because if it goes bad, it's not just going to go kind of bad, it's going to go really bad. Now, and I've talked about this before, the nature of people that are anti-war, the nature is that they will raise the alarm and they will get things wrong a lot. But that's kind of a good thing. We don't want to be in a world war. And so it's good when people raise the alarm and say, hey, let's not do things that could possibly lead to this. On the other hand, it doesn't necessarily make them wrong. It doesn't necessarily make them wrong in the sense that they can't acknowledge that something went well, right? But you also have to be careful that you don't take that and say, see, because the outcome was good, because Iran hasn't bombed us yet, because they haven't unleashed a bunch of, terrorists to engage in terrorist activities. You can't just say, well, because of that, it was therefore a good idea to go and bomb them. The reason that if you're going to make an argument that bombing Iran was a good idea, it has to be based on the information that you had available before you bombed them. And that information was not, are they going to retaliate? You don't have that information. Now you might, or at least like, unless it's some weird situation where maybe the US reached out and said, we're going to bomb you for show. Where can we bomb you? And they can say, okay, well, you can bomb us here. We'll rattle our sabers. Like, I guess if you have that conversation, but then again, that's not resulting, because now you've been told what's going to happen. Right. So again, resulting is where you justify a prior action based on the outcome. And a lot of people did that. They were like, and it blurs the line a little bit, because there is the line of, hey, you were wrong, right? However, that person presented the risk of World War III, right? They might have been wrong. Like if somebody said outright, we will absolutely be in World War III if you do this. Well, they are making an assessment, and that's going to be either correct or incorrect. I believe that, I'd have to go back and listen to Dave's words specifically, but I believe that he never actually said, if you do this, it's going to be 100%. Now, he might have. And to call him out as being wrong is fine. Okay. Again, that's fine. Just don't cross into resulting, where you say, see, therefore it was a good idea because nobody got hurt. Nobody got killed. Besides, like the show's not over. Like, people can engage in terrorist activities years after you commit an action. And they can say, yeah, this is for that. I was just waiting for the right moment. Right. So it's not even a done deal at this particular point. But I do want to point out, because a lot of people have done that. A lot of people, and resulting happens all the time. Here, I'll give you a great example of how that happens in the real world. Let's say I decide to get drunk, right? I drink a whole lot. I'm out with my friends. We're out at the lake. I drink a whole lot, and I decide that I'm going to jump off a tall rock into the water. And people are like, dude, I wouldn't do that. The water's, only 5 foot deep, and you've been drinking, and, it's probably not a good idea. So then I jump off of that big rock. I land in the water. I come out. We all have a good laugh. Haha, that was great. I didn't get hurt. I might later go back and say, yeah, see, it's fine. It was no big deal because I didn't get hurt. Right. You see how it's going? I'm justifying the action that I took based on the outcome, but I couldn't know the outcome until it actually happened, because nothing is certain until it happens. So the way that you judge whether or not something was a good idea is based on the information that you had available to you at that time. And that's something that Annie Duke calls resulting. She wrote a book about it. She talks about how in the process of, being a poker player, she maybe goes back and watches the old tapes. She watches what she did. She determines, okay, I made this decision based on this information, so on and so forth. And she does all that so that she can improve her decision-making process in the future. So that's how you improve making decisions, is by making sure that you evaluate past decisions based on the information that you had available, not the outcome. Because you can do a good thing and have a bad outcome. You can do a bad thing and have a good outcome. You can do both of those and have the opposite outcome, right? You can do a good thing. It can be a bad outcome, a good outcome, a bad thing with a bad outcome, a good outcome. All right. So I think I've kind of made that point. Let's move on to the next video here. Let's see what we've got. Where are we on time? I think we're good on time. So this one, Josh was asked, is Israel an ally? Now, they were asked yes or no, is Israel an ally? And Josh immediately said yes. Dave immediately said no. And then after that, they were given an opportunity to discuss. So here's what Josh had said. So let's play this.
You say Israel is an ally, spend a minute on that, and then address how some people have concerns that Israel is influenced in the U.S. government, and then I'll allow Dave to have some time. Josh.
All right, there's multiple reasons why Israel is an ally. First and foremost, I think most people in this room are believers of some stripe, right? I am Jewish. Most of you are probably Christians, and God bless you for that. If you have any attachment whatsoever to the holy sites, if you have any attachment whatsoever to this narrow strip of land between the river and the sea, as the Hamas propagandists call it, then you're going to have some reason to care about this particular sliver of land. That's point number one. Let's just kind of get it out there, especially if you understand that we in Western civilization are fundamentally at war with barbarism being best represented by the Islamists and Sharia supremacists. When you understand that Western civilization really just is the Bible, there is a special calling to have an ally with a certain part of the Middle East. That's point one. Point two is...
So, and like, it's a fair point. The thing I would be concerned about is, we're talking about, is Israel an ally? So it's like, is this person our friend? And instead of talking about why this person is a friend to us, he's talking about why we might have a relationship in that region. So I don't think that his first answer actually answers the question. So let's continue.
Just the Islamist deterrent point, Charlie, which is that America has faced jihadism time and time again, going back for 40, 50 years. 9/11, obviously the most tragic example. We just saw it again on the streets of Bourbon Street in New Orleans on January 1st, just a few months ago there. If you care about deterring Islamism from conquering Western civilization, a point that you have very astutely been talking about a lot recently on your TV hits and on social media, a very, very important point. If you care about defending Western civilization from the barbarians, you absolutely have to place a special premium on this particular relationship.
Okay, so I think he misses the mark a little bit here. He says, if you care about this particular violence that might come from this particular crowd, then yes, you should care about this relationship. But again, that's not telling us why this entity is our friend. How are they? Like, I'll give you a story. I had a girlfriend years ago, and she would notoriously be like, she had other friends, which was just cool. Like, I'm not going to like, oh, how dare you have friends? But she had some other friends that I had never met, and they would sometimes call her up in the middle of the night and say, "Hey, can you come and pick me up? I'm drunk. I need a ride home." And she would go get them. And like, we were talking about this because I think one day she was extremely tired and she had went and picked up a friend or something like that. And I was like, "Well, why do you pick up your friend?" She's like, "Well, I want to be a good friend." And I said, "Okay." I was like, and we just through the conversation, I was just like, "Well, do they hang out with you?" And she was like, "Well, no." And I was like, "Do they call you up for lunch?" And she was like, "Well, no." And I was like, "Do they call you on your birthday or just to, whatever, for any kind of event or reach out at all?" And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Do they contact you for anything else other than come get me a ride?" And she was like, "No." And I was like, "They're not your friends." And I was, and so, in this particular case, I was like, I was judging whether or not this person or these people were her ally, if you will, based on how do they treat you when they don't need you, right? Do they call you up for lunch? Do they do anything? And so I think Josh is kind of doing something similar here. He's kind of looking at the one side, our side, and he's like, well, this is why you should care about it. But he's not actually saying this is why they are an ally. They're an ally because they did this, or they took this hit for us, or they whatever, right? Like, if I get into a fight and my buddy jumps in and protects me, because I'm getting my ass handed to me, I could say, and then later someone says, "Well, how do you know he's your friend?" Like, man, he jumped in when I was getting beat up and he took a few punches from me, right? Like, that's how you demonstrate an ally, a friend. And so far, his first 2 points don't do that.
And then third is that if you actually care as I do, paradoxically, I actually care a lot about China. In fact, I think that America's by far number one biggest threat this century is China. If you care about effectuating this broader pivot to the Indo-Pacific, as American foreign policy people have been talking about for 20, 30 years now, you have to have some way of stabilizing the Middle East. The way to do that is not to just adopt the stupid and asinine Barack Obama foreign policy of appeasing America's enemies. And the way to do that is to embolden your allies. Again, that is the Trump doctrine.
Okay. So he doesn't actually point out how Israel was an ally. He just says, well, if you want all these things, then they're our ally. Okay. But that isn't like, okay, yeah. It's almost like if you were to tell that old girlfriend of mine, hey, if you want these people to go out to lunch with you, you need to be their friend and go pick them up when they're drunk. But then they never call you up for lunch. And then you're still like, well, yeah, but if you want all these things, well, yeah, I want them, but I'm not getting them. Right. It's maybe not the best example, but I think you get the gist. He's not actually saying how are they an ally, and I don't know if people picked up on that, but hopefully you did. When people ask you a question, it's good to make sure that you understand what is the question, and am I answering the question as asked, not am I answering some variant of it. And I think here in that particular case, he answered a variant of it. All right, let's see. We got another video here. I got plenty of videos. Don't worry, I'm not short of any videos here. So here's Dave talking about, is Israel an ally? So let's watch.
This idea that the great battle of our time is us versus the Islamists, us versus these barbarians. That's really the problem here in the United States of America. Lebanon. That's what you got to worry about. Listen, I think everyone here, all you guys should know this at this point. Our problem in America is the deep state of the United States of America, okay? They're the ones who framed Donald Trump for treason. His own intelligence agencies framed the sitting US president. And you know what that deep state wants, by the way? Permanent war. That's what they always want. That's how they and their friends make their money. And so all of this talk is just so ridiculous, man. I mean, this talk about how, like, if you care about the holy sites in Israel, like, okay, sure. Obviously, Christians and Jews and Muslims have a connection to that land. But that doesn't mean we have to bomb Iran for Israel.
Who's saying that?
Doesn't. Well, we just bombed Iran. That was the first topic. Oh, okay. Anyway.
So I wish I had kept count of how many times Josh interrupted. And I find that to be the most irritating thing, particularly when Dave didn't do it so much. Toward the end he did, but not so much leading up to that. I think it's always good to let your opponent speak because it just simply looks bad on you that you have to constantly interrupt him. Okay. But I think what Dave is doing here is pretty good because he's countering this narrative. So Josh's narrative didn't really answer the question of whether or not Israel is an ally. He was just like, look, we need them to be an ally, even if I'm not going to describe to you how they actually are. And, it's kind of the implication that he gives. Like, do you want these things? Then we got to have them as our ally. But he doesn't say, how are they actually being a friend to us? Are they accomplishing these things that I'm talking about? Are they doing these things for us at their expense in some way? Because that's what a friend does, right? If I'm a friend, I might go to the restaurant you want to go to sometime, and some other time you might go to the restaurant that I want to go to, right? We have this back and forth. All right, let's continue listening.
It doesn't mean that we have to support Israel slaughtering people in Gaza. None of that has anything to do with the holy sites. And in fact, a lot of sites get destroyed when there's bombs flying. But listen, the real problem for America, if you want to even talk about like the Islam taking over America or taking over Europe, well, how did that happen? That happened because we completely destabilized the region, fighting war after war after war that did nothing but slaughter hundreds of thousands of people. And then our Western governments had the most insane open immigration policy that was basically suicidal. We're doing this to ourselves. We're $37 trillion in debt, and we're looking for another enemy to go fight. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've spent $20 trillion on empire and wars. And you know what? We can't tax enough money to pay for it. We can't borrow enough money to pay for it. So what do? We print the money. And now you guys are coming out into the world and you're wondering why you're 6 figures in debt from college and you're getting a job at DoorDash and the average house goes for $800,000 because we've destroyed the currency chasing these monsters that were never any threat to our country. So listen, one quick point. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis couldn't bring down America. Joseph Stalin and the commies couldn't bring down America. The British Empire couldn't bring down America. But you think the Hezbollah in Lebanon are a threat to us? They're a problem for Israel to deal with.
Say that to the families of the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983. Seriously, say that to them.
Okay, so again, he interrupts. And I think the reason he interrupted is because, we can hear from the audience. They really liked that response, that where he concluded. Now, Dave didn't in that particular clip. He did not discuss why or why not Israel was an ally. But he does respond to Josh's comment, and I think, or not his comments, and I think he did a good job of saying, okay, here is where that argument is wrong. And he's like 12 trillion in debt, this. He's laying out facts that we could go look up. And we could say, is that true? Does Dave know what he's talking about? Or at least does he know about the information, whether or not we agree with how he's put it together and the conclusion that he's drawn, right? But we can go back and look. So I think when you're debating somebody, you're better off answering the questions. But if you deviate to respond to your opponent and do so with as much, knowledge and information as you can, but put together in a way so that it takes it home for the audience. And if you notice, he did talk to the audience directly. He said, when you graduate and you have, all this debt and you're getting a job at DoorDash and the houses are $800,000. Now, in that particular context, I think he was kind of being a little bit loose with the facts, right? Like, it depends on where you are. If you're in California, then a house might be $800,000. But if you're in Nebraska, probably not so much, right? So it is a little context there. But I think he did a good job of bringing it home to the audience, because at the end of the day, that is who you are talking to, right? So make sure that what you say is something that they can pick up, take away, and run with. All right. So let me I'm getting close to my time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to what I think are their worst moments, and then we'll get to some comments, and then we'll close. So let me pull that video up here real quick. So I had some other videos, but uh, let's see. You know what? I'm going to do 3 more videos here real quick, and then we'll wrap it up, because Charlie made a really good point that I thought was a value add, and it should be mentioned. So I'm going to do that. So let me pull that up really quickly here. All right. So let me turn that off. All right. So here's Charlie's comment that I think he makes a very good point on, that I would recommend all my libertarian peers to not forget.
So let's talk Gaza, because first I want to go, Josh, on October 7th, because I want you to remind people what happened on October 7th. And Dave, I'll be honest, I think your portion of the debate, your portion of your community could do a better job of remembering the horror on October 7th. I'm just going to be honest. I'm not putting that on you. I'm saying just your community. But I'm going to have, okay. That's just me. I want you just to think, because I think we kind of forget, because there was something unique and terrible.
Okay. So he's basically like, look, your crowd tends to, at least appear to diminish or kind of downplay the atrocity that is October 7th. And I think there's some truth to that. I think sometimes the anti-war crowd gets so anti-war that it becomes easy to kind of look at them and say, well, you must be for the other side, right? So it's easy. So you're so busy criticizing Israel for their actions that people hear a lot of criticism of Israel, but they don't really hear criticism of Hamas. Now, from my perspective, the reason I would do that is because I inherently agree that Hamas are terrible people. That doesn't really need explaining. It goes without saying. Whereas Israel is presented as the good guy. And so if I'm looking at this situation and I go, well, the good guy's acting not so good, that's where I might focus on. I'm not going to focus on talking about how the bad guy's acting bad, because the bad guy's acting bad. He's doing exactly what I would expect. So there doesn't seem to me, from my perspective, to put a lot of emphasis there. I'm going to put more emphasis in, okay, the good guy is not, or the alleged good guy is not acting good. I need to talk about that, because we're not talking about it and they're getting away with it, right? So if that's you, I think you need to heed Charlie's words. And that doesn't mean you need to preface everything with going, okay, so just so people know, October 7th is bad. But every now and then you can make a comment to that effect. You could say something like, as awful and terrible as this was, that doesn't excuse this, right? So basically, you're acknowledging that, yes, terrible and awful. And then you go into your broader point, your more important point. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that for people. This is less about debate in itself and more about, don't forget what is important to the other side. And if the other side starts to get the feeling that you think something that's important to them isn't, and that isn't the case, then it's on you to kind of shift that perception. Put it like this. In the libertarian community, we don't believe that you own your reputation, right? Like, people could say whatever they want about DL, about me. That's their opinion. I have no control over that. However, I do have some influence. I don't have control, but I have influence. And so if I'm always talking about how bad Israel is, and I never talk about how bad Hamas is, or I don't at least throw it in there every now and then, and that's my belief, then I probably should, just so that people don't get the wrong impression. Okay. Let me give you another story from my life to kind of help reinforce that. Years ago, when I was working at a company, there was a guy, he made all kind of jokes. He was a jokester, all kind, and that was fine. Like, cool, no big deal. But his jokes always were either about gays or pedophiles. Always. Like, he would always just find some way to make a joke about that. And finally, one day I was like, dude, I was like, that's all you ever joke about. It's starting to make me wonder about you. I'm just saying, like, that's what I hear. I'm starting to get an impression because of that. If you make a joke every great once in a while, like, okay, no big deal. You just found a good opportunity to make this joke, right? So the same applies when we're talking about policy, foreign policy, domestic policy, right? If you talk about one thing to the exclusion of another thing, then people might start getting an impression about what you're excluding. So make sure, especially, and it's especially important if what you're excluding or what you appear to be excluding is of high importance to them. And so basically, this amounts to read the room. All right, so let's get on to their worst moments, because I think that both of them had a worst moment here. So this is Dave's worst moment, in my opinion. So let's play it.
So Dave, take 2 minutes, and then I have a crisp follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, geez, there's a lot there. First of all, look, if you support what Israel's doing in Gaza right now, I would just, like, my advice to you guys is just know that you never have a leg to stand on claiming to be pro-life for the rest of your life. Just saying that. If you, so it's okay to support policy.
Let's not boo our speaker,
It's
Dave.
okay to support
Make
a
your
policy
message.
that is killing babies. All of a sudden, killing babies is negotiable. All right, fine. I'm just
For Hamas.
reading the room.
So Dave, why don't you?
No, I'm not talking about for
hold on,
Hamas.
hold on.
Human
Back
shields,
up,
dude.
back,
Human shields.
hold on, back up, Dave.
I just let you go
Dave,
on this whole long
I know.
thing.
I'm going to actually help you out
yeah.
here, Dave. Okay. What I'm doing is I want you to tell the audience what's going on in Gaza, because some people in the audience don't know what's going on. So don't assume they know, and let's not get back.
Oh, okay. Well, I did assume that most people know that lots of babies are being killed in Gaza, but maybe I shouldn't have assumed that.
Don't be sarcastic about it, Dave. Instead, I mean this. Because
no, I meant that
not
literally. I did assume
information
that.
loop where they're on social media all the time. Okay, so
So I think Charlie's trying to be fair and neutral and reasonable here, and I think my impression when you watch this in full context, because this is toward the end of the debate, I think Dave is starting to get frustrated. That's just my I don't know for sure, right? Because he held his composure much better up until this point, and I think twice he comes across as insulting the audience. Number one, he argues with the audience, right? And he's like, "Oh, so it's okay? Okay, that's where we are now. Okay, fine. Okay, I guess that's where we are, right?" And he's talking to the audience. Like, you can see that he looks out at the audience. I think he argued with somebody that booed at him or whatever, right? That's not a good thing, because again, you are trying to convince the audience that your position is the one that they should adopt. And so it gets tough, because the arena of ideas is like politics. It's a full contact sport. And so it gets rough. The longer and better that you can hold your composure, the better off you will be. I think Dave did a good job, but I think in terms of worst moment, this would be it, because he did it not once, but he did it twice back to back. Now, had this been at the beginning of the show, that would have been very bad, because then you can lose your audience. Now, I will say this: Dave is a comedian. And so I will kind of put a little bit of a I will add just a note here that I think is worth considering. Dave may have been more deliberate in his response to the audience on purpose, and understand, and with the full knowledge that he could lose his audience at this moment. The reason I say that is Dave's a comedian. His job is literally to stand before an audience and interact with them. He tells jokes, basically. He makes commentary, tells jokes, whatever, and then the audience is supposed to laugh. If they don't laugh, then he has to figure out, okay, what do I do with this? Right? Do I skip my next joke? Do I make a joke about the audience not laughing? Which I've seen comedians do. Like, how do you handle this? If you are not seasoned with managing an audience, working an audience, a crowd, then I would absolutely tell you not to argue with them. Okay. So in Dave's case, you could make the argument that he knows what he's doing. It was on purpose. And he felt like, he knew, I can go this far without losing the audience. But if that's not you, don't do that. But I still think it was his worst moment just because he played it much cooler leading up to this. And then he kind of gets, a little annoyed, which is fair because we are talking about dead children. And if somebody starts downplaying the idea of dead children, that's going to make you angry. So I get it. But again, we're here to communicate an idea and convince people of it. So let's move on to Josh's worst moment here. And let's see what he did.
How then should Israel have responded to October 7th? Be specific. I know you might say, well, don't kill kids, but hold on. How would you say you would be okay for Israel to respond? Because it would be a defensive war at that time. 1,300 of their own kids and women were killed and raped. So please just answer, how then would you be okay with Israel responding to October 7th?
I'm sorry, and I guess I am partly rejecting the premise of your question. But let me just say it like this, Charlie.
So I want to pause here. I did cut that so that it would be a bit shorter. So he goes on and he talks. He kind of gives an answer, and then so I cut it to where he jumps back and says, "Look, I'm rejecting the premise of your question." So I just want to point that out. There's a bit missing there, but it's just Dave giving his perspective, and we're not talking about Dave here.
If you're pro-life, and you say
Such a stupid argument. You should not buy this for a second.
Okay. So Dave is about to give an argument. He's about to make a point. And Josh jumps in and says, "Oh, this is a dumb argument. You shouldn't even believe any of this, blah, blah, blah." Right? Like he comes across as very confident in what Dave's about to say. So I want you to listen.
Dave, finish his sentence.
Shut up, bro. It's not
Hamas
it's a
is part
stupid
of
argument.
here.
It's a stupid argument. You haven't heard the argument. What's the argument that's stupid?
Dave,
you're not pro-life.
Guys,
no, what's the argument?
It's Hamas that is not
What's
pro-life.
the argument?
Josh,
You just called stupid.
Dave,
what's the argument?
This is what.
Hold on one second, Charlie.
I know people don't
what's
like
the argument
that
you?
Not
Okay.
enjoyable to watch. Okay?
What's the argument that you called
Why
stupid?
don't you finish it, Josh?
Because he doesn't even know what it is. He interrupted me before I even said it. Okay, here's the argument. If you're pro-life, it's not incumbent on you to have a plan for what the mother ought to do with the baby. Like, you don't have to have a plan for daycare and college funds and all that. You just say, hey, I think this option should be off the table. I don't think you have the right to murder the baby while it's inside of you. Likewise, I'm not saying I have to have the perfect plan. If we had more time, I could expound on what I think they should have done. But how about don't deny 1 ounce of grain for 3 months and then shoot at the poor people who are trying to get food?
Josh,
how
respond.
about you take that option off the table? Is that argument stupid, Josh?
Okay. So I don't know that the final was necessary, but I totally get it. Here's the thing. When somebody's making a point, you need to be very, very careful to not interrupt and tell them that's a dumb point that you're about to make. Because in this particular case, I believe that Josh thought the argument that Dave was going to make was the same one that I thought he was going to make, which was, hey, if you claim you're pro-life, you should be against dropping bombs and indiscriminately killing children. That's the argument that I thought Dave was about to make. I thought he was going to package it differently, but I thought he was going to make that basic argument. Pretty sure that Josh thought the same thing. But then Dave took it somewhere entirely else. And so now, like earlier, Josh was like, "Oh, you look stupid." You look stupid when you say your argument is a bad argument before they've made it. And then it becomes clear later that the argument that they're making was not the same one that you were trying to criticize. Now, and it's not 100% clear, but I'm fairly positive based on if you listen very carefully to, when they're kind of going back and forth, Josh says a couple of things that kind of suggest that he believes the argument is going to be this simple. Hey, if you're pro-life, you should be against, dropping bombs on children, right? That seems to be pretty clear in my opinion. You can disagree with you, but one way or another, do not interrupt somebody when they're trying to make their point, because if you get it wrong, you are the one that's going to look foolish. And even if their argument is not a good one, they now have the upper hand, right? So if you're trying to debate somebody, the goal is to win, to convince other people of your ideas. You don't want to give somebody the upper hand. Basically, don't give them a silver platter. Don't give them their argument on a silver platter. And so I think in this particular case, Josh absolutely did that. He makes Dave's answer look even better because he disagreed with it. And then it turns out it wasn't even the argument that Dave was making. So never do that. All right. So that's my assessment. I had some more, but I've got to go because, it's time to go to work. And I know that you guys got to get out of here. Let's hit up some comments real quick. I'll probably only do just a couple if you guys don't mind today. just because, I want to get out of here, and I try to keep this within a time frame, but it is what it is. Let's see. I used to call into Mark K show for Conspiracy Theory Thursday. We had 30 seconds to tell it. I would normally have to reduce my notes as I timed myself. And yes, talking fast. Yes. One of the things that I did to practice public speaking is I would take my speech and I would say, this speech is supposed to be 5 minutes. I would stand in front of a mirror and I would watch me and I would time myself. And I would, and I would just stand in front of a mirror and talk. Standing in front of the mirror makes it feel a little awkward, kind of like you're in front of an audience. Because you're looking at yourself and it's kind of weird and awkward. So I try to recreate the awkwardness. And then I talk, and then when I'm done with my speech, I look down and I see how much time and I'm like, oh man, 7 minutes, that's not going to work. Then I got to figure out what I did. You can also record yourself as well. That's a good way to do it. But yes, practice. Let's see. She said, I was reading a note card though, so not exactly the same, but I definitely practiced it. Nonetheless, even if you're reading from a script, you want to practice it. Why? Because if you're reading from a script, I want you to see, like I've got this bottle of bai here, right? And so if I read the ingredients, I could say filtered water, blueberry juice, concentrate, malic acid. Like you can see that it sounds like I'm reading. But if I've practiced it, then I can make it more smooth. And I can be like, oh, the ingredients, they've got filtered water and blueberry juice concentrate, malic acid, strawberry juice concentrate, potassium, blah, 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 right? I can say it more naturally with a better flow. And when I first started this podcast, I will tell you, I actually scripted everything and read it. And my friends would tell me, I could tell when you came to the end of the line on the page because you had this extra pause where it didn't belong. And so if you're reading from a note card, chances are your sentence may span more than one line. And so you're going to want to practice it so that you can smoothly transition from one line to the next while you're in the middle of a sentence so that it doesn't sound like you're making that transition. So yes, practice. Let's see. John McLaughlin, just sub. So now I'll be tuning in. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody that comes in and says hello and watches the show. Let's see here. All right. That Liberty lady said she's got a jet, as do I. So Adam, another new name. Dave Smith won, not because he's a more talented debater, but because he is correct on the issue. I would agree. I would agree with that, but I would also say it's a little bit of both. There were a few other things where I was like, maybe not do that. But again, that's kind of a dispute on how you handle an audience. I think overall, what really works in Dave's favor is two things. Number one, I agree with him, and I think he's correct on the issue, like you said, Adam. But number two, I think the fact that he is a comedian gives him a bit of an upper hand because his job is literally to work a crowd, to work an audience, to get to get them to a place that he wants them. In that particular case, it would be get them to laughter and enjoying the show. In this particular case, in a debate, it's believing that, hey, you know sufficient amount about this topic that I should listen to you and consider your words. So I think his delivery works very well. I think also what works in his favor is the fact that I believe he's correct on the issue as well. So hopefully that was as objective as you could get. I know I was not in favor of Josh. I did not come into this with any animosity. I don't know who Josh is, but hopefully that I retain the title of most objective libertarian. You guys can let me know in the comments later if you think so or if not. But for now, I've got to get out of here. So I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.